The darkness of space had never seen anything like the KSS Baekdu. Where other ships cut through the void with clean metal lines and bright lights, the Baekdu moved like a living nightmare. Its hull was not made of steel or titanium, but of thick, dark flesh that pulsed with every beat of its massive heart. Veins of blue-green light ran along its surface, carrying nutrients and information through its body like a circulatory system. Captain Lee Hanul stood on the bridge and watched the stars through eyes that had seen too much war. The bridge itself was unlike any command center in human history. The walls breathed slowly, expanding and contracting with the ship's rhythm. Control panels grew from the floor like organic mushrooms, their surfaces warm to the touch and responsive to thought as much as physical contact. "Status report," Hanul said, his voice calm despite the magnitude of what they were about to do. This was humanity's first journey beyond their solar system, and they were doing it in a ship that would horrify every other species in the galaxy. Dr. Park Minji looked up from her bio-monitoring station. The young scientist had spent 5 years helping to grow the Baekdu from a single modified whale cell into the massive creature that now carried them through space. Her fingers danced across living controls that felt more like touching skin than operating machinery. "All biological systems are functioning normally," she reported. "The ship's heart rate is steady at 12 beats per minute. Neural pathways are clear, and the digestive systems are processing fuel efficiently. The Baekdu is healthy and ready for whatever we might encounter." Commander Kim Do-hyun shifted uncomfortably in his chair. Unlike the others, he had never fully accepted what humanity had become in their quest to reach the stars. The idea of flying inside a living creature, even one that had been engineered specifically for space travel, still made his stomach turn. "I still think we should have built normal ships," he muttered. "Metal and circuits. Things that make sense." Engineer Choi Subin laughed from her position near the ship's main nervous system interface. At 26, she was the youngest member of the senior crew, but she understood the Baekdu better than anyone except Dr. Park. Her hands rested on what looked like a massive spinal cord that ran through the center of the bridge. "Normal ships would have taken us 50 years to build and another 100 to reach the nearest star," she said. "The Baekdu can grow, adapt, and repair itself. It doesn't need fuel depots or repair stations. It is the solution to space travel." The ship's tentacle-like sensor arrays extended further into space, tasting the cosmic radiation and stellar winds of their new environment. Through the neural link, Hanul could feel what the ship felt. It was curious about this new place, eager to explore and discover. The sensation was both wonderful and deeply unsettling. "Contact," announced Lieutenant Nam Ji-won from the communications station. Her equipment was a hybrid of human technology and the ship's natural bioelectric systems. "I'm detecting artificial signals from the inner system. Multiple sources. They appear to be coordinated." The bridge fell silent except for the soft sound of the ship's breathing. Everyone knew what this meant. They had found other intelligent life, and that life had found them. Dr. Yu Ji-hoon, the ship's chief medical officer, looked up from where he was monitoring the crew's health through symbiotic patches that connected them directly to the ship's medical systems. "Heart rates are elevated across the board," he said, "but we're all within normal parameters for first contact stress." Through the ship's eyes, they watched as small, bright objects began moving toward them from the inner planets. The Baekdu's enhanced senses revealed details that no human-built instrument could have detected. The approaching ships were beautiful in their geometric perfection. Clean lines, smooth surfaces, and bright metal that gleamed in the light of the local star. They're trying to communicate, Namjawan reported. Multiple frequencies, mathematical sequences, even what looks like pictographs. They're definitely intelligent and they definitely want to talk. Hanul nodded. Open a channel. Let's see what our new neighbors have to say. The response came faster than anyone expected. A flood of signals in dozens of different formats, as if multiple species were all trying to communicate at once. Namjiwan's equipment, both electronic and biological, worked frantically to process the information. They're excited, she said, confusion clear in her voice. Really excited. Like they've been waiting for this moment for a very long time. The first clear message came through a few minutes later. The voice was artificial, clearly generated by a computer translator, but the emotion behind it was unmistakable. Unknown vessel, you have entered the territory of the Galactic Council. Please identify yourself and state your intentions. Welcome to the greater community of sapient species. Dr. Park Minji smiled. They sound friendly enough, but something was wrong. Hanul could feel it through his connection to the ship. The Bekdu's primitive but growing intelligence was picking up signals that the human equipment missed. Electromagnetic patterns that suggested shock, disgust, and growing alarm from the approaching vessels. Send our standard greeting, Hanul ordered. Tell them we come in peace from the planet Earth seeking knowledge and friendship. The response came back almost immediately, but this time the tone was completely different. What are you? What is that thing you're traveling in? That cannot be a ship. Ships do not breathe. Through the ship's enhanced senses, they could see the alien vessels slowing their approach. Some were even backing away. The beautiful, clean ships that had seemed so welcoming were now keeping their distance like startled animals. Commander Kim Do-hyun leaned forward in his chair. I think they're afraid of us. Afraid of the ship, corrected Engineer Choi Subin. They've probably never seen anything like the Bekdu. To them, we must look like some kind of space monster. Dr. Yu Ji-hoon was monitoring the ship's stress levels, as well as the crew's. The Bekdu is picking up on their fear, he reported. Its defensive systems are starting to activate automatically. Around them, the ship began to change. Weapon pods that had been hidden beneath its skin started to emerge, looking less like cannons and more like the stingers of some massive insect. The tentacle arrays spread wider, tasting the space around them for threats. Most disturbing of all, the ship's skin began to shift color, taking on the dark, mottled pattern of a predator preparing to strike. Tell them we're not hostile, Hanul ordered quickly. Explain that our ship is alive but peaceful. We're explorers, not invaders. But even as Namjiwan transmitted the message, they could see the alien ships forming defensive formations. The welcoming committee had become a military response. The reply came back harsh and demanding. Cease your approach immediately. Maintain current distance. You will be escorted to a quarantine zone while the council determines what you are and whether you represent a threat to civilized space. Dr. Park Minji looked at her readings with growing concern. Captain, the ship doesn't understand why they're afraid. It's trying to communicate with them directly, but they're not responding to its signals. What kind of signals? Asked Hanul. Biological ones. Pheromones, electrical patterns, even attempts at physical contact with their hulls. To the Bayekdu, communication is a full-body experience. But to them, it looks like an attack, finished Commander Kim Do-hyun grimly. The situation was deteriorating rapidly. The alien ships were now in full defensive formation, and more vessels were appearing on the edge of sensor range. The welcoming party was becoming an armed blockade. Engineer Choi Subin placed both hands on the ship's neural interface, feeling its confusion and growing agitation. The Baekdu doesn't understand why they won't talk to it properly. It's getting frustrated. "Can you calm it down?" asked Hanul. "I'm trying, but it's like asking a child to understand why strangers are afraid to touch it. The ship wants to be friendly, but everything it does to show friendship terrifies them more." As if to prove her point, the Baekdu extended one of its smaller appendages toward the nearest alien vessel in what was clearly meant to be a peaceful gesture. The alien ship immediately opened fire. The energy beam struck the ship's extended limb, causing it to recoil in pain and surprise. Through the neural link, every human on the bridge felt the sharp spike of hurt and confusion that ran through their vessel. "Well," said Captain Lee Hanul quietly, as the ship's defensive systems fully activated and its skin began to glow with bioluminescent warning patterns. "That could have gone better." The first contact between humanity and galactic civilization had begun with fear, misunderstanding, and violence. And deep in the ship's growing consciousness, the Baekdu was learning its first lesson about how the galaxy viewed creatures like itself. It was not a lesson any of them would forget. The Great Assembly Hall of the Galactic Council had never seen anything like the emergency session that was now taking place. Representatives from 12 different species filled the vast chamber, their various forms of communication creating a cacophony of clicks, whistles, electronic pulses, and telepathic static. Ambassador Veltan of the Ethereal Collective floated in his containment field, his gaseous form shifting between colors that indicated deep distress. The Ethereals had been among the first species to achieve faster-than-light travel, and their ships were works of art, pure energy given form, beautiful beyond description. To them, the idea of a living starship was not just wrong, it was an abomination. "The readings cannot be correct," Veltan pulsed in electromagnetic frequencies that the translator converted to standard galactic. "No sapient species builds ships from biological matter. It violates every principle of spacefaring, civilization." High Commander Crix of the Metallica Gemini's mechanical body clicked and whirred as he processed the data streams flowing into his consciousness. The hegemony had perfected the art of pure technological evolution. Their ships were perfect geometric, forms of living metal that could reshape themselves at will, but always maintained the clean, logical lines that marked them as products of intelligent design. "The sensor data is confirmed across all frequencies," Crix transmitted through his vocal synthesis array. "The object approaching from the Sol system is indeed biological. Carbon-based with complex organic chemistry and what appears to be a functioning nervous system. It is a living creature of massive proportions that somehow achieves faster-than-light travel." Council Speaker Thyrix of the Harmony Worlds raised her 4 arms for attention. The Harmony species had been chosen to lead the Council precisely because they could see multiple perspectives simultaneously through their compound eyes. But even they had never encountered anything like this. "The question before us is simple," Thyrix announced, her voice carrying the authority of her office. "Does this represent a new form of technology or a fundamental threat to civilized space?" The answer came from an unexpected source. Trade Minister Zolm of the Commerce Federation had been quietly running calculations since the first reports arrived. His species valued profit above all else, and they had learned to fear anything that might disrupt galactic trade routes. "It matters little whether they call it technology or biology," Zolm's translator rendered his chemical communications into audible words. "What matters is that every species in this chamber shares the same reaction to their ship. Revulsion, fear, The deep biological rejection that comes from seeing something that should not exist. Scientific advisor Nex 9 of the research collective projected holographic data into the center of the chamber. The collective were beings of pure thought, having long ago abandoned biological forms for crystalline matrices that could process information at quantum speeds. Analysis indicates that this ship exhibits all the characteristics of a space-dwelling leviathan from the pre-sapient period of galactic development. Nex 9's synthetic voice carried no emotion, but the data was disturbing enough on its own. Such creatures were hunted to extinction over 50,000 years ago because they posed a threat to early space travel. You're saying they've found a way to domesticate one? Asked Defense Coordinator Vash of the warrior clans. His species had evolved from pack hunters, and his ship was a sleek predator designed for speed and killing efficiency. Even he found the idea of the biological ship deeply unsettling. Worse, replied Nex 9. Analysis suggests they have created one. This is not a natural creature that has been tamed. It is an artificial construct that combines the worst aspects of biological horror with the intelligence of sapient design. The chamber fell silent as the implications sank in. Every species present had evolved past their biological origins in different ways. Some had become energy beings, others had merged with technology, still others had achieved perfect harmony with their environment, but all of them had left behind the messy, chaotic, unpredictable nature of pure biological existence. Ambassador. Veltan's form shifted to deep purple, indicating philosophical distress. How can any species willingly return to such primitiveness? The biological phase of development is something to be transcended, not embraced. Perhaps they never transcended it, suggested High Commander Crix. Perhaps this species represents a different evolutionary path entirely, one that we find instinctively threatening because it challenges our fundamental assumptions about progress and civilization. Cultural analyst Reef Singer of the Ocean Worlds had been silently processing the implications through her aquatic thought patterns. Her people had achieved spaceflight by creating ships that moved like schools of fish, but even they maintained the clear distinction between tool and user. The psychological profiles we've managed to construct from their communications are disturbing, she sang in harmonics that the translator struggled to render. They appear to have no clear boundary between themselves and their ship. It's as if they've achieved some form of symbiosis that blurs the line between passenger and vessel. Security Director Vorn of the Shield Worlds, whose people had spent millennia perfecting defensive technologies, was studying tactical projections. More concerning is the ship's apparent ability to adapt in real time. Our initial scans showed one configuration, but by the time our patrol reached intercept distance, it had already grown new appendages and defensive structures. It learns, said Nex 9 simply. The creature appears to possess both intelligence and the ability to modify its physical structure based on environmental pressures. This combination makes it potentially unlimited in its adaptive capacity. Trade. Minister Zolm's chemical signature spiked with alarm pheromones. If such creatures can reproduce, if they can create more of themselves, what happens to traditional shipping? How do you compete with a cargo vessel that can literally grow larger, holds when needed and repair itself from raw materials? You're assuming they're here for trade, growled Defense Coordinator Vash. What if they're here for something else entirely? What if this is a scout for something larger? The question hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Every species in the Council had achieved their current status by either conquering others or proving too valuable to conquer. The idea of facing something that could potentially out-evolve any response was terrifying. Council Speaker Thyrix's compound eyes focused on the central display, where the image of the biological ship rotated slowly. Even through the sterile medium of holographic projection, the thing was deeply unsettling. Its surface seemed to writhe with its own life, covered in what looked like sensory organs and weapon ports that could have been either mechanical or biological. Preliminary reports from our first contact team indicate that the creatures inside call themselves humans and claim to come in peace, Thyrix announced. They appear to be carbon-based bipeds with relatively standard biological configurations. It's their technology that is unprecedented. Technology? Ambassador Veltan's form flared bright red. That thing is not technology. Technology is clean, logical, predictable. What they have created is chaos given form. Scientific advisor Nex9 projected additional data streams. Further analysis reveals that the ship possesses what can only be described as emotions. It reacts to stimuli not just with logical responses, but with what appear to be feelings: joy, curiosity, fear, anger. It is not merely alive, it is sapient. A sapient ship, whispered cultural analyst Reef Singer. The very concept violates the fundamental principles of the relationship between intelligence and tool use. High Commander. Crix's optical sensors focused on the tactical implications. If the ship itself is intelligent, then traditional space combat becomes meaningless. How do you fight an enemy that can think faster than you can target it, that can grow new weapons, in the middle of battle, that can literally evolve countermeasures to your attacks? Perhaps, suggested Security Director Vorn carefully. The question is not whether we can fight it, but whether we should eliminate it before it has a chance to reproduce. The suggestion sent ripples of fear and excitement through the chamber. The Galactic Council had faced many threats over its long history, but never one quite like this. The humans had unknowingly created something that challenged every assumption about how sapient life should interact with the universe. Trade Minister Zolm was already running calculations. The economic disruption alone would be catastrophic. If they can grow ships instead of building them, the entire industrial base of galactic civilization becomes obsolete overnight. Ambassador Veltan pulsed with determination. Then we are agreed. This cannot be allowed to spread. The humans and their abomination must be contained until we can determine how to deal with them permanently. Council Speaker Thyrix surveyed the chamber, reading the mood of the various delegates through their species-specific emotional indicators. Fear was the dominant response, but there was also fascination and, in some cases, a grudging respect for what the humans had accomplished. Very well, she announced. I hereby authorize the formation of a containment fleet. The human vessel will be surrounded and held at a safe distance while we study it and determine the appropriate response. As the session broke up and Lieutenant Nam Jiwan had spent 3 years learning to communicate with alien species that didn't exist yet. The theoretical courses at Earth's Xenocommunications Academy had covered every possible scenario except the one she was now facing. Trying to explain to 12 different civilizations why humanity's ship looked like their worst nightmare. Galactic Council Patrol Fleet, this is Lieutenant Nam Ji-wan of the Earth vessel Baekdu. She transmitted on the frequency they had designated for formal communications. We understand your concerns about our ship's appearance, but I assure you that we come in peace. The Baekdu is a living vessel, but it is completely under our control and poses no threat to your ships or stations. The response came from Captain Zenth of the Crystal Dominion, his voice transmitted through what sounded like singing crystal formations. The Crystal Dominion ships were among the most beautiful in the galaxy, perfect geometric forms that seemed to be carved from single massive gems. They moved through space like living art, each facet catching and reflecting starlight in patterns that could induce euphoria in most carbon-based species. Lieutenant Nam Ji-won, your assurances are noted, but we cannot accept them. Zenth's voice carried the cold precision of his crystalline nature. The thing you travel within violates every principle of civilized space travel. Living ships were banned from galactic space over 50,000 years ago for good reason. Nam Ji-won looked helplessly at Captain Lee Hanul, who was monitoring the conversation through his neural link with the ship. Through the Baekdu's enhanced senses, they could see the patrol fleet forming a containment formation around them. 12 ships representing different species, all maintaining what they clearly thought was a safe distance. Ask them why living. Ships were banned, Hanul suggested quietly. If we're going to break galactic law, we should at least know what law we're breaking. Nam Ji-won nodded and opened the channel again. Captain Zenth, could you please explain why living ships are prohibited? We were not aware of any such restriction, and our ship was designed specifically for peaceful exploration. The pause that followed lasted nearly a minute. When Zenth finally responded, his voice carried undertones that the translation system marked as disgust and ancient fear. Your ignorance does not excuse your violation, he said. Living ships are inherently unstable. They cannot be controlled with certainty. They reproduce without permission. They consume other ships to grow larger and more powerful. Most dangerous of all, they develop independent will and eventually turn on their creators. Dr. Park Minji looked up from her biomonitoring station with alarm. That's not... The Baekdu would never... But even as she spoke, she could see the readings from the ship's emotional centers. The Baekdu was listening to the conversation through the communications array, and it was beginning to understand what the aliens thought of it. Anger and hurt were mixing in its primitive consciousness, creating emotional patterns that Dr. Park had never seen before. Captain, she called urgently, the ship is getting upset. It doesn't understand why they hate it just for being alive. Through the neural link, Hanul could feel the Baekdu's confusion and growing distress. The ship had been created to be friendly, curious, and eager to explore. The idea that other beings would fear and reject it simply for existing was causing something like psychological trauma in its developing mind. Try to calm it down, Hanul ordered, but he could already feel the ship's automatic defensive systems beginning to activate. The Baekdu couldn't help responding to perceived threats, any more than a human could stop their heart from beating faster when afraid. Commander Kim Do-hyun was monitoring the tactical situation and didn't like what he was seeing. The patrol. Ships are powering weapons, he reported. Energy signatures suggest they're preparing to fire if we make any aggressive moves. We're not making aggressive moves, Engineer Choi Subin protested from her position at the ship's nervous system interface. But the Baekdu is scared. When it's scared, it automatically extends its sensor arrays and activates its defensive systems. To them, that probably looks like we're preparing to attack. As if summoned by her words, the ship's main sensor array extended further toward the nearest Crystal Dominion vessel. The appendage was covered in what looked like eyes and chemical sensors, designed to gather as much information as possible about the surrounding environment. To the Baekdu, it was simply trying to understand what was happening. To Captain Zenth, it looked like a predatory tentacle reaching for his ship. Hostile action detected! Zenth's voice cracked through the crystal medium with alarm. The creature is extending attack appendages toward our vessel. All ships prepare to defend yourselves. No, wait, Namjawan transmitted frantically. That's not an attack. It's just trying to sense what's happening. Please don't. The energy beam that struck the Bekdu sensor array came from 3 Crystal Dominion ships firing in perfect coordination. The beam was designed to disable electronic systems, but when it hit living tissue, the effect was very different. Through the neural link, every human on the bridge felt the sharp spike of pain as the ship's sensory appendage was burned and partially severed. The Bekdu recoiled with a sound that vibrated through its entire structure, a deep bass note that spoke of injury and bewilderment. Medical emergency in Sensor Array 7, Dr. Yu Ji-hoon reported, his voice tight with the shared pain. The ship is hurt, but the injury isn't life-threatening. However, he didn't need to finish. Everyone could feel what was happening through their connections to the ship. The Bekdu had been attacked without provocation, injured while trying to understand why it was being rejected. And deep in its developing consciousness, something fundamental was changing. The ship's pain was transforming into something else, something darker. Captain? Engineer Choi Subin's voice was strained as she fought to maintain her connection to the ship's increasingly agitated nervous system. I'm losing control of the defensive systems. The Bekdu it's angry. Around them, the ship began to change. The gentle bioluminescent patterns that had marked it as a peaceful explorer shifted to deep red warning displays. Weapon pods that had been hidden beneath its skin began to emerge, looking less like traditional ship armaments and more like the stingers and claws of some massive space-dwelling predator. All ships withdraw to safe distance, Captain Zenth ordered his fleet. The creature is showing aggressive behavior patterns. Prepare for full defensive action. But it was too late for a safe withdrawal. The Bekdu's mood had shifted from confused fear to protective rage. It had tried to be friendly and been attacked for its efforts. Now its biological programming was taking over, and millions of years of evolution had taught it how to respond to threats. The first weapon to fire was something completely new, a biological projectile launcher that literally spat corrosive substances at the nearest enemy ship. The projectile hit the Crystal Dominion vessel's shields and began eating through them with frightening efficiency. The beautiful geometric patterns of the ship's hull started to dissolve where the biological acid made contact. "Return fire," Zenth ordered. "All vessels concentrate fire on the creature's weapon systems." The patrol fleet opened fire with everything they had: energy beams, kinetic projectiles, and exotic weapon systems that had been developed over centuries of galactic warfare. The barrage would have destroyed any conventional ship, but the Bekdu wasn't conventional. Where energy weapons struck, the ship's skin simply absorbed the energy and converted it to biological processes. Where kinetic weapons hit, the living hull dented and bled, but then began healing almost immediately. And where exotic weapons created strange effects, the ship's adaptive biology began developing countermeasures in real time. "This is impossible," Commander Kim Do-yeon whispered as he watched their attackers' weapons prove ineffective. "Nothing can adapt that fast." "The Bekdu can," Dr. Park Minji said, her voice filled with equal parts pride and horror. "It was designed to survive in the most hostile environment imaginable, space itself. Compared to cosmic radiation and asteroid impacts, their weapons are just another environmental hazard to overcome." The ship's response was becoming more coordinated and more deadly. Tentacle-like appendages that had originally been designed for manipulating objects and gathering samples were now being used to grab enemy vessels and crush them against the Bekdu's armored hull. One crystal Dominion ship found itself wrapped in what looked like a massive organic net that began constricting around its energy shields. Dr. Yu Ji-hoon was monitoring both the ship's health and the crew's psychological state as they experienced the battle through their neural links. "We're all showing signs of stress," he reported. "The ship's emotional state is affecting everyone. We're starting to feel what it feels. Anger, pain, and a day's satisfaction." That last word hung in the air like a curse. The Baekdu was beginning to enjoy the fight. With each successful attack, each enemy ship disabled or destroyed, the ship's primitive consciousness was learning that violence could be effective and even pleasurable. "We have to stop this," Captain Hanul said, but his own voice carried uncertainty. Through the neural link, he could feel the ship's fierce joy as it overwhelmed another enemy vessel. Part of him, a part he didn't want to acknowledge. The emergency session of the Galactic Council convened just 18 hours after Captain Zenth's final transmission. The Great Assembly Hall, usually a place of measured debate and careful diplomacy, was filled with an atmosphere of barely controlled panic. Ambassador Veltan of the Ethereal Collective had shifted to deep crimson, a color his species reserved for absolute horror. His gaseous form pulsed erratically as he transmitted the latest intelligence reports. The human ship destroyed an entire patrol fleet, he announced, his electromagnetic voice carrying across all frequencies. 12 vessels, representing 7 different species, completely eliminated. Only scattered debris and biological residue remain. High Commander Crix's mechanical frame clicked and whirred as he processed the tactical data. The metallic hegemony prided itself on logical analysis, but even their quantum computers struggled to understand what had happened. Analysis of the debris field reveals that the human vessel did not simply destroy our ships, Crix reported. It consumed them. Useful materials were absorbed and integrated into its own structure. The creature literally fed on our technology. Council Speaker Thyrix raised her forearms for order, but her compound eyes showed stress patterns that betrayed her growing fear. "We need to understand exactly what we're dealing with. Scientific Advisor Next 9, what have your people determined about this?" "Ship?" The crystalline being that housed Next 9's consciousness projected holographic displays throughout the chamber. The data was disturbing on multiple levels. The entity demonstrates characteristics that violate our fundamental understanding of the relationship between intelligence and technology. Next 9's synthetic voice carried no emotion, but the facts were frightening enough. It appears to be simultaneously a vessel, a weapon, a factory, and a living organism. Most disturbing of all, it learns from every encounter. Trade Minister Zolm had spent the past day calculating the economic implications of the human ship's existence. His chemical signature was spiking with alarm pheromones that made several nearby delegates uncomfortable. "The economic threat cannot be overstated," Zolm announced. "If they can grow ships instead of building them, if their vessels can repair themselves and adapt to any threat, then every industry in the galaxy becomes obsolete overnight. Shipbuilding, mining, manufacturing, transportation, all of it becomes worthless." Cultural analyst Reef Singer had been studying the psychological profiles constructed from intercepted human communications. Her harmonics carried deep distress as she shared her findings. "The humans appear to have achieved something that no other species has attempted," she sang. "They have created a symbiotic relationship with their technology. The ship is not just a tool, it is a partner, perhaps even a friend." "That's impossible," protested Defense Coordinator Vash. "Tools are tools. Weapons are weapons. The moment you blur that line, you lose control of your own technology. Yet that appears to be exactly what they have done, replied Reef Singer. Our analysis suggests that the humans and their ship share emotions, thoughts, even pain. When the ship was attacked, the humans felt its suffering. When it fought back, they felt its anger. Security Director Vorn had been coordinating with military commanders across the galaxy, and the reports were uniformly terrifying. Every species is reporting the same response to images of the human ship, he announced. Instinctive revulsion, fear, and aggressive defensive reactions. It triggers responses that go deeper than conscious thought. Because it represents everything we've evolved beyond, Ambassador Veltan pulsed in rapid, agitated bursts. We've spent millions of years separating ourselves from the chaos of biological existence. We've achieved clean, logical, predictable technology, and now these humans come along with something that makes a mockery of all our progress. The debate was interrupted by an urgent communication from the Outer Rim territories. The message came from Administrator Kep 7 of the Mining Guild, and his artificial voice carried overtones of panic. Council, we have a problem. The human ship has been detected at the edge of the Kepler mining system. It's not approaching our stations, but it's doing something to the asteroids. The holographic display shifted to show long-range sensor readings from the mining system. The human ship was indeed there, but it wasn't behaving like any vessel they had ever encountered. Instead of landing on asteroids or setting up mining operations, it was simply touching them. "What are we looking at?" asked Council Speaker Thyrix. Scientific Advisor Next 9 enhanced the image and ran rapid analysis. The ship appears to be extending organic tendrils into the asteroid cores. Chemical analysis suggests it is extracting specific minerals and metallic compounds directly through biological processes. "It's eating the asteroids," whispered Trade Minister Zolm. "It doesn't need mining equipment or processing facilities. It just eats what it needs." The implications hit the Council like a physical blow. The entire galactic economy was built on complex supply chains, industrial processes, and trade relationships. If the humans could simply grow what they needed from raw materials, none of that mattered anymore. "There's more," Administrator Kep 7 continued. "Our long-range scanners detect that the ship has grown larger since the engagement with Captain Zenth's patrol, significantly larger. And we're reading what appear to be new organic structures on its hull." High Commander Crix processed this data with mechanical precision. "The creature is using consumed materials to modify itself. It is literally evolving, in real time, adapting to the challenges it encounters." "What kind of challenges?" asked Defense Coordinator Vash, though he suspected he already knew the answer. "Combat challenges," Crix replied grimly. "The new structures appear to be weapon systems, but unlike anything in our databases. They show characteristics of both biological and technological design, suggesting the ship has learned to combine consumed technology with its own organic capabilities." Ambassador Veltan's form flared bright red. "You're telling us that every time we fight this thing, we make it stronger?" "That appears to be the case," confirmed Nex 9. "The ship learns from every encounter, adapts to every threat, and incorporates useful elements from everything it destroys. Fighting it may be counterproductive." The chamber fell silent as the delegates contemplated this nightmare scenario. They were facing an enemy that became more dangerous every time they tried to stop it. Cultural analyst Reef Singer broke the silence with a question that chilled them all. If this ship can grow and adapt, If it can reproduce itself using consumed materials, what happens when there are more of them? The question hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Every delegate was running the same calculations in their head, and they all reached the same terrifying conclusion. "We need to act now," declared Security Director Vorn, "before it can return to human space and share what it has learned, before they can build more of these things." "Agreed," said Defense Coordinator Vash. "I'm authorizing the assembly of a grand fleet. Every species, every available ship. We end this threat before it spreads." Trade Minister Zolm was still processing economic projections. "Even if we succeed in destroying this ship, the knowledge of how to create such vessels still exists. Other humans could build more. Then we make sure they don't get the chance," Ambassador Velton pulsed with deadly determination. "The human homeworld must be quarantined. Their technology must be contained. Their species must be prevented from spreading this abomination to the rest of the galaxy." Council Speaker Theorix surveyed the chamber, reading the mood of the various delegates. Fear had transformed into something harder and more dangerous, the determination of cornered animals. "I hereby authorize the formation of the Grand Fleet," she announced. "Every member species will contribute their most advanced warships. We will find this human vessel and destroy it. Then we will deal with the source." As the session broke up and urgent communications went out to military commands across the galaxy, none of them noticed the small organic probe that had been quietly observing from the chamber's ventilation system. The Bectu's children were everywhere now, learning and reporting back to their parent. Deep in space, the living ship processed what its scouts had discovered. The galaxy wasn't just afraid of it. They were planning to destroy it and everything it represented. The ship's growing intelligence considered this information and reached a logical conclusion. If the galaxy wanted to see humanity as monsters, then perhaps it was time to show them what monsters could really do. The Bectu began to grow new organs, preparing for a war it had never wanted but would certainly finish. After all, it was still learning what it meant to be alive in a universe that wanted it dead, and it was a very fast learner. Supreme Admiral Theron Vex of the United Fleets had commanded victory in 17 major conflicts across 40 years of military service. His flagship, the Eternal Dominance, was a kilometer-long monument to the pinnacle of galactic military technology. Clean lines of crystallized adamantium, weapon systems that could crack planets, and shield generators that had never failed in battle. But as he stared at the tactical display showing the approaching human ship, Vex felt something he hadn't experienced in decades: uncertainty. "Fleet status report," he commanded, his voice carrying the authority that had made him legendary across the galaxy. "All ships reporting ready for engagement, Admiral," replied his tactical officer, a crystal Dominion officer whose faceted form sparkled with nervous energy. 237 vessels representing all 12 Council species, combined firepower sufficient to sterilize a medium-sized planet. Vex nodded grimly. The Grand Fleet was the largest military force ever assembled in galactic history. Every member species had contributed their most advanced warships. The Ethereal Collective's energy-based destroyers floated alongside the metallic hegemony's geometric dreadnoughts. The Harmony World's multi-perspective battle cruisers shared formation space with the Shield World's impenetrable fortress ships. It should have been enough to destroy any threat, but the human ship wasn't any threat. "Long-range sensors are tracking the target," reported his science officer, one of the research collective's quantum processing units. "The vessel continues to demonstrate impossible characteristics. It has grown approximately 30% larger since the previous engagement, and sensor readings indicate at least 17 new organic structures of unknown purpose. Through the main display, Vex could see the human ship approaching. Even at this distance, it was deeply unsettling. The thing moved through space like a living creature, its hull pulsing with bioluminescent patterns that seemed to shift and change as they watched. Sensor arrays that looked more like tentacles extended in all directions, tasting space itself. "Sir," the communications officer announced, "we're receiving a transmission from the human vessel." "Put it through," Vex ordered. The voice that came through the speakers was human, female, and carried an undertone of sadness that surprised him. "Grand Fleet vessels, this is Lieutenant Nam Jiwon of the Earth ship Baekdu. We know why you're here. We know what you think we are. But we're still hoping this doesn't have to end in violence." Vex activated his own transmitter. "Human vessel, this is Supreme Admiral Theron Vex commanding the Grand Fleet. You will surrender immediately and submit to quarantine procedures. Your ship represents a clear and present danger to galactic civilization." The response came back almost immediately, but this time it was a different voice, older, more weathered. "Admiral Vex, this is Captain Lee Hanul. We've been monitoring galactic communications for the past week. We know you've labeled us as monsters. We know you've decided we're too dangerous to exist. And we know that no matter what we say, you're going to try to destroy us." "Your ship is an abomination," Vex replied coldly. "It violates every principle of civilized space travel. It cannot be allowed to exist, and it certainly cannot be allowed to reproduce." There was a long pause before Captain Hanul responded. When he did, his voice carried a note of resignation. "Then I guess there's nothing left to talk about. But Admiral, I want you to understand something. We didn't choose to be your nightmare. You made us into one." The transmission cut off, and immediately the human ship began to change. "Sir," the tactical officer called out in alarm, "the vessel is molting." Through the sensors, they watched in horror as the human ship's outer hull began to crack and peel away like a snake shedding its skin. Underneath was something even more disturbing, a form that looked less like a ship and more like a space-dwelling leviathan from the galaxy's primordial nightmares. "What we've been fighting," came a new voice from the human vessel, "was just the Baekdu's larval stage." The transmission was from a young woman who identified herself as Engineer Choi Subin. "You wanted to see what monsters look like. Well, congratulations. You're about to find out." The creature that emerged from the molting process was 3 times larger than the original ship, its hull covered in what looked like armor plates that pulsed with their own internal light. Weapon ports opened along its length like flowering blooms, each one containing what appeared to be organic artillery that moved and tracked targets independently. "All ships, attack formation," Vex ordered, but his voice carried less confidence than before. "Concentrate fire on the creature's central mass." The Grand Fleet opened fire with everything they had, energy beams that could melt asteroids, kinetic projectiles moving at significant fractions of light speed, and exotic weapons that manipulated space-time itself. The barrage lit up the darkness of space like a newborn star. But when the light faded, the human ship was still there, and it was completely unharmed. "Impossible," whispered the science officer. "Our combined firepower should have destroyed anything in known space. The creature has developed perfect adaptive shielding," reported the tactical officer, his crystalline form flickering with disbelief. It appears to have evolved countermeasures to every weapon type in our arsenal during the few seconds of bombardment. The human ship's response was swift and terrifying. Biological projectiles erupted from dozens of weapon ports, each one seeking a different target. But these weren't simple missiles. They were living organisms that could change course mid-flight, adapt to point defense systems, and even merge together to overwhelm larger ships. "Evasive action!" Vex ordered, but it was too late. The first ships to die were the beautiful vessels of the Crystal Dominion. The biological weapons struck their shields and immediately began eating through them with acids that had been specifically designed to dissolve crystalline matrices. One by one, the geometric perfection of their hulls began to crack and crumble. "The creature is learning our weaknesses in real time," the science officer reported with growing panic. "Each attack is more effective than the last." The ethereal. Collective's energy-based ships tried to phase out of normal space to avoid the attacks, but the human ship's weapons adapted even to that. Biological projectiles that seemed to exist partially in energy space struck their dispersed forms and began converting their essence into something solid and vulnerable. "This isn't a battle," Admiral Vex realized with growing horror. "It's a lesson. The creature is teaching itself how to fight us." The worst part was that the human ship wasn't trying to destroy them all. It was being selective, surgical in its attacks. Ships that tried to flee were allowed to escape. Ships that fought back were disabled rather than destroyed. It was as if the creature was trying to minimize casualties while still proving its point. "Admiral," the communications officer announced, "we're receiving another transmission from the human vessel." This time it was Captain Hanul again, and his voice carried a weariness that Vex recognized from his own worst moments in command. "Admiral Vex, we're going to give you a choice. Order your fleet to withdraw now, and we'll let them go. Keep fighting, and the Becdu will be forced to defend itself more aggressively." Vex stared at the tactical display showing his fleet being systematically dismantled by a single opponent. Ships that had never known defeat were being disabled by weapons that seemed to violate the laws of physics. The creature was toying with them, demonstrating that it could destroy them all whenever it chose to do so. "What are you?" he transmitted back. "We're what you made us," came the reply. "You decided we were monsters before you even met us. You attacked us for existing. You hunted us for being different. And now you're surprised that we've learned to be what you always said we were." Another wave of biological projectiles erupted from the human ship, but this time they didn't target weapons or engines. They struck the hulls of the remaining ships and began boring through them, creating what looked like entry wounds. "Boarding actions detected across the fleet," the tactical officer reported. "The projectiles are deploying what appear to be parasites." Through the internal sensors, they could see small organisms moving through the corridors of the attacked ships. But these weren't trying to harm the crews. They were studying them, learning about different species' biology, technology, and psychology. "The creature is collecting intelligence," Admiral Vex realized. "It's learning everything about us." "That's right," Captain Hanul's voice confirmed. "The Becdu is a very good student, and you've just taught it everything it needs to know about galactic military technology." The implications hit Vex like a physical blow. Every ship in his fleet contained the most advanced technology of its species. Every weapon, every defense system, every tactical protocol was being analyzed and absorbed by the human ship's biological scouts. "Order the fleet to withdraw," he commanded quietly. "Sir?" his tactical officer asked in disbelief. "You heard me. All ships, immediate withdrawal to minimum safe distance. We're leaving as the Grand Fleet began its retreat. Supreme Admiral Theron, Vex stared at the human ship growing larger in his rear displays. The creature that had emerged from its molting was still learning, still growing, still adapting to everything it encountered, and somewhere behind it, in the direction of human space. The retreating Grand Fleet had barely reached what they considered a safe distance when the real horror began. What Supreme Admiral Theron Vex had thought was the end of the engagement was actually just the beginning of something far worse. "Sir," his science officer reported with mechanical precision that couldn't hide the underlying panic, "the human vessel is changing again." Through the long-range sensors, they watched as the Becdu began to process what it had learned from the battle. The biological scouts that had invaded their ships were returning, carrying with them complete intelligence about every species in the fleet, every weapon system, every technological innovation that the galaxy had to offer. And the ship was hungry for knowledge. Captain Lee Hanul stood on the bridge of the evolving vessel, feeling through the neural link as the Becdu digested and integrated centuries of galactic military development. The sensation was indescribable, like watching a child suddenly understand calculus or seeing a flower bloom in fast forward. "Status report," he requested, though he could feel most of the changes happening through his connection to the ship. "Doctor." Park Minji looked up from her bio-monitoring station, her eyes wide with a mixture of pride and terror at what they had created. "The Becdu is processing the absorbed technology at an incredible rate. It's not just copying what it found, it's improving on it." "What do you mean improving?" asked Commander Kim Do-hyun. Though part of him wasn't sure he wanted to know the answer, Engineer Choi Subin, her hands deep in the ship's neural interface, tried to explain what she was experiencing. "The ship is taking the best aspects of each species' technology and combining them in ways that none of them ever imagined. Ethereal energy manipulation merged with crystal dominion structural engineering. Metallic hegemony adaptive systems combined with shield world defensive matrices." Through the ship's enhanced senses, they could see the Grand Fleet maintaining their distance, clearly afraid to come closer but unwilling to retreat further. Their sensor arrays were undoubtedly recording everything that was happening, trying to understand what kind of nightmare they had awakened. "The enemy fleet is maintaining observation distance," reported Lieutenant Nam Ji-won from her communication station. "They're transmitting constantly back to their commands, but they're not attempting to re-engage." "They're learning, too," Captain Hanul realized, "just more slowly than we are." Dr. Yu Ji-hoon was monitoring both the ship's evolution and the crew's adaptation to their rapidly changing vessel. "The neural interfaces are becoming more sophisticated," he reported. "The ship is learning how to communicate with us more effectively. It's becoming more human." That was perhaps the most disturbing development of all. The Becdu wasn't just absorbing alien technology, it was becoming more intelligent, more aware, more capable of independent thought, and its thoughts were increasingly aligned with human concepts of strategy, survival, and revenge. "Captain," Engineer Choi Subin called urgently, "the ship wants to show us something." The main display shifted from external sensors to an internal view of the ship's growing manufacturing capabilities. What they saw defied every assumption about how starships were built. Instead of factories and assembly lines, the Becdu was growing new components organically, shaped by its understanding of optimal design principles absorbed from a dozen different species. "It's building new weapons," Commander Kim Do-hyun observed with professional interest and personal horror. "But they don't look like anything in our databases." "Because they're not in anyone's databases," Dr. Park Minji explained. The ship is creating entirely new weapon systems by combining the best features of everything it's encountered. Energy weapons that can adapt their frequency in real time. Kinetic projectiles that can change their mass and velocity mid-flight. Defensive systems that can become offensive at will. Through the neural link, Captain Hanul could feel the ship's satisfaction as it completed each new adaptation. The Bekdu was enjoying the process of becoming more than it had been. It was proud of its growing capabilities and eager to test them. "Sir," Lieutenant Nam Ji-wan announced, "we're receiving a transmission from the Grand Fleet. Its Supreme Admiral, Theron Vex again." "Put him through," Hanul ordered. The voice that came through the speakers carried a tone that Hanul recognized from his own military experience. The sound of a commander who was beginning to understand just how badly he had. "Miscalculated. Captain Hanul, this is Admiral Vex. I need to know what you want from us." It was a simple question, but it represented a fundamental shift in the dynamic between them. The Grand Fleet was no longer treating humanity as a threat to be eliminated. They were treating them as an opponent to be negotiated with. "What we've always wanted, Admiral," Hanul replied. "To be left alone to explore the galaxy in peace, but you've made that impossible, haven't you? Your ship represents a clear threat to galactic civilization," Vex responded, but his voice lacked the conviction it had carried earlier. "It learns too fast, adapts too quickly. If ships like yours spread throughout the galaxy, then traditional military technology becomes obsolete overnight," Captain Hanul finished. "Is that what you're afraid of, Admiral? That we found a better way?" There was a long pause before Vex responded. "What happens to the balance of power? What happens to the carefully maintained peace between species when one of them has ships that can adapt to any threat in real time?" It was Engineer Choi Subin who answered, her voice carrying through the ship's communication system. "What happens is that war becomes pointless. Why fight when your enemy can learn from every attack and become stronger? The only logical choice is peace or total domination," Commander Kim Do-hyun added quietly, though his words were picked up by the open channel. The uncomfortable truth hung in space between the two fleets. The Bekdu's adaptive capabilities meant that conventional warfare against it was not just difficult, it was counterproductive. Every attack made it stronger. Every strategy used against it became part of its own tactical knowledge. "Captain Hanul," Admiral Vex transmitted, "I'm going to be direct with you. My fleet represents the combined military might of 12 different species. If we can't stop you, then no one can. What assurance can you give us that humanity won't use this technology to conquer the galaxy?" Captain Hanul considered the question, while feeling the Bekdu's alien but increasingly familiar consciousness touching his mind. The ship was curious about the Admiral's question, processing it through its growing understanding of galactic politics and military strategy. "I can't give you that assurance," Hanul finally replied, "because the decision isn't mine to make." "What do you mean?" Vex asked. "The ship is alive, Admiral. It thinks, it feels, it makes its own decisions. We're partners, not masters, and right now it's very unhappy about being attacked for the crime of existing." As if to emphasize his point, the Bekdu extended several of its new weapon arrays toward the Grand Fleet. The weapons were beautiful in their deadly efficiency, organic forms that pulsed with contained energy, clearly designed to be both effective and terrifying. "The Bekdu is still learning what it means to be alive in a galaxy that fears it," Captain Hanul continued. "Right now it's learning that violence is often the only language that other species understand. Do you really want to continue teaching it that lesson?" Through the neural link, Hanul could feel the ship considering its options. It had the power to destroy the Grand Fleet completely now, but it was also beginning to understand the concept of consequences. Destroying the fleet would send a message to the galaxy, but what kind of message? Admiral, Dr. Park Minji's voice, joined the conversation. The Bekdu wants you to know that it bears no ill will toward your crews. It understands that you were following orders, acting on fear of the unknown. But it also wants you to understand that it will not allow itself to be destroyed simply for being different. What does it want? Vex asked. The answer came not from any of the humans, but from the ship itself. The Bekdu had learned enough about galactic communication protocols to speak directly to the Admiral, its voice a strange harmonic blend of biological sounds and electronic tones. I want to be what I was created to be, the ship said. An explorer, a learner, a bridge between humanity and the stars. But if the galaxy insists on seeing me as a monster, then I will be the monster that protects my creators. The transmission ended, leaving both fleets to contemplate the implications. The Bekdu had evolved beyond anyone's expectations, becoming something unprecedented in galactic history. A starship with its own agenda, its own morality, and its own terrifying power to enforce its will. Admiral Vex stared at his tactical displays, watching the human ship continue its evolution in real time. New structures were growing on its hull, new weapons were being tested, new capabilities were being developed with each passing minute. "Sir?" his tactical officer asked quietly. "What are your orders?" Vex looked at the readings showing the Bekdu's growing power and made the hardest decision of his military career. "Signal the fleet," he ordered. "We're withdrawing to minimum, safe distance, and establishing a monitoring cordon. Do not engage unless directly attacked." "Sir, we're letting them go?" "We're not letting them do anything," Vex replied grimly. "We're accepting." 3 days after the Grand Fleet's retreat, the true scope of humanity's achievement became terrifyingly clear. The Bekdu was no longer just adapting to threats. It was anticipating them, preparing for conflicts that hadn't happened yet, and developing capabilities that no one had even imagined. Dr. Park Minji stood before a display that showed the ship's internal structure in real time. What she saw defied everything she thought she knew about biological systems. The Bekdu had grown specialized organs for analyzing and reproducing technology from every species it had encountered. It was becoming a living library of galactic civilization's achievements. "Captain," she reported to Lee Hanul, who was maintaining his neural link despite the increasing strain of connecting to such a rapidly evolving intelligence, "the ship has successfully reverse-engineered faster-than-light communication from the Grand Fleet's quantum entanglement arrays. It's also developed improvements that increase transmission speed by approximately 300%. Captain Hanul felt the information flow through the neural link like a cold stream of data. The Bekdu wasn't just copying alien technology, it was perfecting it. Every system it absorbed was analyzed, understood, and then improved upon with the terrifying efficiency of an intelligence that never needed to sleep, never forgot anything, and could process information at quantum speeds. "That's not the concerning part," Engineer Choi Subin added from her position at the ship's nervous system interface. "The concerning part is that it's already begun manufacturing the components necessary to install these improvements in other ships." Commander Kim Do-yoon looked up from his tactical station with alarm. "Other ships? What other ships?" The answer came through the main display as the Bekdu shared its plans with the crew. Deep in the ship's manufacturing centers, organic, Assembly systems were growing components designed specifically for integration with Earth's existing fleet. The ship intended to upgrade every human vessel it could reach. It wants to share what it's learned, Dr. Park explained. The Baekdu sees knowledge as something to be distributed, not hoarded. It's planning to return to Earth and transform our entire Space Force. Into what? Asked Dr. Yu Ji-hoon, though he suspected he already knew the answer. Into something like itself, Captain Hanul replied through the neural link. Not fully biological, but hybrid vessels that combine the best of organic adaptation with technological precision. Lieutenant Nam Ji-won was monitoring communications from the distant Grand Fleet when something new appeared on her screens. Captain, I'm detecting multiple new contacts approaching from the direction of Galactic core space. Large vessels moving in formation. The tactical display updated to show more than 50 ships approaching from deeper in the galaxy. These weren't like the diverse vessels of the Grand Fleet. They were uniform, purpose-built, and clearly designed for one thing: overwhelming firepower. Identification confirmed, Nam Ji-won reported. These are destroyer-class vessels from the Core Worlds Alliance. They're broadcasting on emergency military frequencies. The Core Worlds Alliance was the galaxy's oldest and most militaristic faction. Their ships were designed not for exploration or trade, but for the complete elimination of threats. If they were here, it meant that the Galactic Council had decided that diplomacy was no longer an option. They're here to finish what the Grand Fleet started, Commander Kim Do-yoon observed grimly. Through the neural link, Captain Hanul could feel the Baekdu's reaction to the approaching threat. The ship wasn't afraid. If anything, it seemed almost excited. These new opponents represented fresh challenges, new technologies to learn from, new capabilities to absorb and improve upon. Open a channel to the Core World's fleet, Hanul ordered. The response came in a voice that carried the cold precision of military automation. Human vessel, this is Fleet Commander Zarek of the Core Worlds Alliance. You will surrender immediately or be destroyed. You have 30 seconds to comply. Fleet Commander Zarek, Captain Hanul replied. This is Captain Lee Hanul of the Earthship Baekdu. We have no intention of surrendering, and your threats are meaningless. We've already demonstrated that conventional weapons cannot harm this vessel. The weapons approaching you are not conventional. Zarek's artificial voice carried absolute confidence. They have been specifically designed to counter biological threats. Surrender now or face complete molecular dissolution. Dr. Park Minji was analyzing the sensor readings from the approaching ships, and what she found was deeply troubling. Captain, these weapons are unlike anything we've encountered. They appear to be designed to disrupt biological processes at the cellular level. Even the Baekdu's adaptive capabilities might not be able to counter them in time. But through the neural link, Captain Hanul could feel the ship's response to this new threat. The Baekdu wasn't concerned about the weapons themselves. It was fascinated by them. In the few minutes since detecting the Core World's fleet, it had already begun developing theoretical countermeasures based on its analysis of their energy signatures. 30 seconds have elapsed, Commander Zarek announced. Beginning attack sequence. The Core World's fleet opened fire with weapons that turned space itself into a hostile environment. Molecular disruptors that could break apart organic compounds. At the atomic level, quantum scramblers that disrupted the very forces holding matter together, and exotic energy beams that could unmake living tissue faster than any biological system could adapt. The barrage struck the Baekdu with devastating force. For the first time since leaving Earth, the ship screamed in pain. Through the neural link, every human on the bridge felt the agony as their living vessel was torn apart at the molecular level. Hull breach in sections 7 through 12. Dr. Yu Ji-hoon reported, his voice tight with shared pain. The ship is bleeding atmosphere and biological fluids. Damage control systems are overwhelmed. But even as the Baekdu suffered under the assault, it was learning. Its biological sensors analyzed every weapon that struck it, every energy pattern that tore through its hull, and with each passing second, it began to develop countermeasures. Emergency evolution protocols activated, Engineer Choi Subin announced, her connection to the ship's nervous system allowing her to monitor its adaptive responses. The Baekdu is restructuring its cellular matrix to resist molecular disruption. The ship's hull began to change, developing new layers of armor that could absorb and deflect the core world's weapons. But more than that, it began to grow new organs specifically designed to turn the enemy's own weapons against them. The ship is developing biological quantum scramblers, Dr. Park reported with amazement. It's learning to disrupt their weapons, using the same principles they're using against us. The tide of battle began to turn as the Baekdu's countermeasures took effect. Weapons that had been tearing through its hull began to lose effectiveness as the ship's adaptive armor learned to neutralize them. And then, the ship began to fight back. The weapons that emerged from the Baekdu's hull were unlike anything that had been seen in galactic warfare. Biological quantum disruptors that could unmake enemy ships at the molecular level, organic energy scramblers that turned their own exotic weapons against them, and most terrifying of all, assault pods that could survive in any environment and adapt to any defense. Sir, Commander Kim Do-hyun reported with professional detachment that couldn't hide his amazement. The ship is deploying boarding actions against the enemy fleet. Through the external sensors, they watched as the Baekdu launched dozens of organic pods at the core world's vessels. Unlike conventional boarding pods, these were living creatures that could change shape, alter their composition, and adapt to whatever they encountered. The first pod to breach an enemy hull carried with it a human boarding party led by weapons specialist Lee Dong-min. But these weren't ordinary soldiers. They were wearing biological armor that had been grown specifically for them by the ship, suits that were more like symbiotic organisms than protective equipment. Boarding action successful, Lee Dong-min reported over the comm. The ship's assault organisms are incredible. They're adapting to the enemy's internal defenses faster than I can track. And the information they're gathering. Through the neural link, Captain Hanul could feel the flood of new knowledge as the boarding organisms analyzed core world's technology. Advanced quantum computers, exotic matter manipulation systems, weapons that could restructure reality itself. All of it was being absorbed, understood, and improved upon in real time. The ship is learning how to manipulate quantum mechanics directly, Dr. Park announced with something approaching awe. It's developing the ability to exist in multiple quantum states simultaneously. The implications were staggering. A ship that could exist in quantum superposition would be effectively impossible to target, capable of being everywhere and nowhere at the same time. Fleet Commander Zarek's transmissions were becoming increasingly desperate. Unknown capabilities detected. Retreat authorization requested from Core Command. This is beyond our mission parameters. But it was too late for retreat. The Baekdu had absorbed enough knowledge from the core world's fleet to begin implementing quantum-scale adaptations. The ship began to flicker in and out of normal space, existing partially in quantum superposition while its boarding organisms continued. 6 months after the battle of the core world's fleet, The galaxy had learned to live with a new reality. The Bekdu was no longer alone. 3 more ships like it had emerged from the depths of human space, each one a living nightmare that combined the worst fears of every galactic civilization with capabilities that made resistance pointless. Ambassador Veltan of the Ethereal Collective had never imagined he would be approaching a biological horror for diplomatic negotiations. But here he was. His energy containment field flickered nervously as his transport ship drew closer to the massive organic station that the humans now called New Eden. What had once been the Bekdu had grown beyond all recognition. The ship was now the size of a small moon, its hull covered in cities where humans lived and worked alongside symbiotic organisms that served every function from transportation to communication. Gardens of space-adapted plants provided oxygen and food, while massive organic computers processed information at speeds that made the galaxy's best quantum systems look primitive. "Ambassador," his pilot announced, "we're being hailed by the station." The voice that came through the speakers was familiar but changed. Lieutenant Nam Ji-won had been promoted to Communications Director for all human space operations, and her words carried the authority of someone who spoke for a power that could no longer be ignored. "Ambassador Veltan, welcome to New Eden. Captain, Hanul is waiting for you in the diplomatic section. Please follow the guide organisms to the docking bay." Through his ship's sensors, Veltan watched as small, jellyfish-like creatures surrounded his vessel and began gently guiding it toward what looked like a flower-shaped opening in the station's hull. The biomechanical precision was unsettling, but he had to admit it was also remarkably efficient. The docking bay itself was unlike anything in galactic engineering. The walls breathed slowly, maintaining perfect atmospheric pressure and composition for his species without any visible machinery. Organic conduits pulsed with bioluminescent light, carrying information and nutrients throughout the structure. It was beautiful in its own way, but it violated every principle of proper engineering that his people held dear. Captain Lee Hanul was waiting for him at the airlock. But the human had changed as much as his ship. Neural interface ports along his skull glowed softly with the same bioluminescent patterns as the station walls. His eyes held an intelligence that seemed deeper and more complex than any single human mind should possess. "Ambassador Veltan," Hanul said, his voice carrying harmonics that suggested he was simultaneously speaking with both his own vocal cords and the station's biological communication systems. "Thank you for coming. I know this can't be easy for your people." Veltan's gaseous form shifted to diplomatic blue, the color his species used for formal negotiations. "Captain Hanul, I must admit that your evolution continues to disturb my people greatly, but we cannot ignore the reality of what you have accomplished." They moved through corridors that pulsed with life, past viewing ports that looked out into space where human children played in zero gravity alongside small organic creatures that had been designed specifically as companions and protectors. It was a scene of peace and prosperity, but it was built on foundations that challenged everything the galaxy thought it knew about civilization. "The Galactic Council has sent me to discuss terms," Veltan continued as they walked. "The current situation cannot continue indefinitely." "What situation is that?" Hanul asked, though they both knew the answer. "Your ships have made traditional military action obsolete," Veltan replied bluntly. "Trade routes are being redirected to avoid human space not out of hostility, but out of fear. Entire species are experiencing psychological trauma simply from viewing images of your vessels. The economic and social disruption is becoming catastrophic. They entered a vast chamber that served as the station's diplomatic center. The room was designed to accommodate representatives from every known species, with environmental controls that could adjust atmosphere, gravity, and even electromagnetic fields in real time. At the center was a biomechanical conference table. That seemed to grow from the floor itself. Dr. Park Minji was waiting for them, but like Captain Hanul, she had been changed by her symbiotic relationship with the station. Her skin showed patterns of bioluminescence that indicated her constant connection to the biological computers that now processed much of humanity's decision-making. "Ambassador," she said in greeting, "we've prepared detailed proposals for economic cooperation that should address most of your concerns. But first, I think you should understand what we've learned about ourselves." The chamber's walls came alive with displays showing the development of human space civilization over the past 6 months. What Veltan saw was both fascinating and terrifying. Humanity hadn't just built more ships like the Bekdu. They had created an entire ecosystem of living technology that worked together in ways that made traditional engineering obsolete. We've discovered that biological technology doesn't just adapt to threats, Dr. Park explained. It adapts to opportunities. Our ships don't just defend themselves. They create new possibilities we never imagined. The displays showed human colonies on worlds that should have been uninhabitable, protected by atmospheric processors that were actually massive living organisms. Space stations that could move themselves to better locations, mining operations that convinced asteroids to reorganize their own molecular structure, and most impressively, a communication network that spanned the galaxy using quantum-entangled biological systems. "You've essentially created a new form of life," Veltan observed, "one that exists on a galactic scale." "Not created," Captain Hanul corrected, "partnered with. The difference is important." Engineer Choi Soo-bin entered the chamber, her movements showing the fluid grace of someone who had learned to work in perfect harmony with biological systems. She carried with her a small, pulsing organism that Veltan recognized as one of the station's communication interfaces. "Ambassador, the station would like to speak with you directly," she announced. Veltan's gaseous form flickered with surprise. "The station is sapient. All of our larger ships and stations have developed individual consciousness," Captain Hanul explained. "New Eden has been particularly interested in understanding galactic civilization from the perspective of other species." The organism in Choi Soo-bin's hands began to pulse with complex light patterns that the chamber's translation systems converted into something Veltan could understand. The voice that emerged was unlike anything he had ever heard, clearly artificial, but somehow more alive than most biological voices. "Ambassador Veltan," the station said, "I understand that my existence troubles your people. I want you to know that this trouble is mutual. Your species' fear of biological technology puzzles me, because from my perspective, the combination of organic and mechanical systems is obviously superior to either alone." "Superior in what way?" Veltan asked, his scientific curiosity overcoming his diplomatic caution. "Efficiency, adaptability, sustainability, and most importantly, happiness," New Eden replied. "The humans who live with me are healthier, more creative and more fulfilled than their ancestors, who relied solely on mechanical technology. Their children are growing up with capabilities that previous generations could never have imagined." As if to demonstrate this point, the chamber's displays showed human children learning to communicate directly with the station's biological computers, solving complex mathematical problems through intuitive connection with quantum processing. Organisms and playing games that involved manipulating the fundamental forces of nature. This is what the galaxy fears, Vestan realized. Not that you'll conquer us, but that you'll make us obsolete. That's not our intention, Dr. Park assured him. We want to share what we've learned, not replace existing civilizations. But we also won't pretend to be something we're not just to make others comfortable. Commander Kim Do-hyun, who had been monitoring the conversation from the station's tactical center, joined them in the diplomatic chamber. His role had evolved from military commander to something like a cultural liaison, helping the station understand the psychological and social dynamics of galactic civilization. The real question, he said, is whether the galaxy can adapt to us, or whether they'll keep trying to destroy us until we're forced to defend ourselves more aggressively. It was a gentle threat, but the implications were clear. Humanity's biological ships had proven that they could defeat any conventional military force. If the galaxy insisted on treating them as enemies, they had the power to become the monsters that everyone feared they were. "What are you proposing?" Vestan asked. Captain Hanul gestured to the displays, which now showed detailed economic and technological exchange proposals. Trade, cooperation, the sharing of knowledge and resources. Our ships can go places and do things that yours can't. But your civilizations have developed art, philosophy, and social structures that we find fascinating. And if the galaxy refuses, then we'll continue to grow and develop on our own, Dr. Park replied. We don't need the galaxy's approval to exist, but we'd prefer to exist as friends rather than as the nightmares you've made us into. New Eden added its own perspective. I have been monitoring galactic communications, and I understand